You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Every start of the week, I sit down with another journalist and talk about the day's top stories and what they say about the Pacific Northwest. We call it Front Page. And joining me today is Will James. He's a reporter and producer who makes audio documentaries, really great ones at KUOW. Will, thanks for being here. I understand you were moving over the past week, and so the fact that you are even sitting upright right now in the studio is amazing. So thanks for coming on Front Page.
Thanks, Libby. I'm a shell of my former self. So this is my return to normal life, and I'm going to do my best to sound alive during this show. And I'm feeling it already.
You're sounding great. The last time I moved was from Los Angeles back home to Seattle, and it still remains the largest fight my husband and I ever got into because I think I left him too much work to do on that move. Yeah. And that's a burden that our marriage will carry forever.
It will echo through the rest of your life.
It really is. Well, let's get down to our top story on Front Page today. Several Seattle schools are on late start today after a deadly shooting in the Rainier Valley. 2 teenagers who are believed to be high school students were shot on Friday afternoon. This happened on Rainier Avenue South as they waited at a bus stop. It was around 4 o'clock, 30 minutes after school let out. At a vigil over the weekend, family members and friends spoke about the boys. Their ages were displayed at the vigil, just 17 and 18. We are not identifying them right now because the school district and the medical examiner's office have not confirmed details. I am going to be talking with the superintendent for Seattle Public Schools later in the show about this. But first, Will, just your thoughts on this loss of these kids and the issue of safety around schools, which has been a really present one over the past few years around SPS campuses.
Yeah, I cannot imagine what these families, what the South Seattle community is going through right now. It harkens immediately for me back to the death of Amar Murphy-Payne at Garfield High School a year and a half ago, which remains unsolved and which has been this horrible scar on Seattle. It's really interesting. You know, gun violence got really bad in the post-pandemic years. We know that. And we know it's been getting better as a whole. But there's been this weird phenomenon of youth victims of gun violence remaining stubbornly high. And according to Lisa Mannion, the prosecuting attorney, even increasing over the years. So there's this question of, like, what is going on? What is going on among these high school-aged kids that is causing this rate of violence to remain so stubbornly high as King County gradually becomes a safer place?
Yeah. Murder rate in Seattle has gone down. The overall number of homicides fell 49% in 2025. So a big drop in violent crime. But as you say, something happening here with youth and with safety around campuses. I want to make a point to say that, you know, the SPD Assistant Chief Tyrone Davis told the Seattle Times that police believe that this was a targeted shooting and that there's not a wider threat to the community. But just the fact that we, talk about that and make that point makes me think about something that you and I heard from Omari Salisbury, the Converge Media founder, who was in studio with us a few months ago. And he talked about that empathy switch that seems to flip with many Seattleites when something happens to a person of color, especially in South Seattle. And if, there is suggestion from the police right away, even if it is unfounded, we don't know the details about, the investigation here. We know that they're asking for tips. It's as though a wide swath of Seattle has this moment to kind of say, they must have been asking for it, basically. They must have been connected somehow. They must have made choices that led to their death. And so therefore, we don't have to care as much about it.
Exactly.
And I just think that if we are going to fix what you were pointing out, youth violence, gun violence specifically, the issue of kids getting shot in and around school campuses, we can't have that empathy switch flip here. We have to lean in and ask, what could we have done more? These were kids. these were children. These were teenagers. And, that to me is what makes me, just really question, myself as a journalist and how we talk about these stories.
Totally. What Omari was calling on us to do a few weeks back in that interview, I think, was to check ourselves and how we react to these stories of gun violence and notice that for a lot of us, when someone is killed in a violent way, our brain searches for a reason to not care. I think there's something self-protective about that.
Yes.
But we look for a reason to say, oh, that's why they died. That could never happen to me. That could never happen to my family. And that can be a really unhealthy reflex for a community because it creates a separation between us and what is going on in our community. So that definitely stuck with me and reminds me to think, to sort of notice that happening.
Yeah.
As it happens.
Yeah. We are going to be talking more with the district superintendent in just a few minutes about this. And again, we're waiting for confirmation on identity of these young kids, these teenagers. But just the images from the vigil, King 5 and the Seattle Times were there. I'll leave folks with this on this story. This is a quote from the mother of one of the slain teenagers. The Seattle Times quoted her saying, "He didn't deserve this. He was a great kid. He's my only child. And he's gone." Turning the page just really quickly here because we've got, another developing story out of what's been happening in Minnesota and its reverberations here in the Pacific Northwest. So thousands of people marched and sometimes rode bikes over the weekend in the Seattle area to protest ICE and memorialize the 2 people killed by federal immigration agents in Minneapolis last month. That's Alex Preddy and Renee Good. Friday was this planned national shutdown, where people were supposed to not go to work or school and not buy anything, though it seems like the more of the protest activity actually happened on Saturday around Seattle. Nurses and doctors and hospital workers rallied outside of Harborview and Swedish. The Seattle Times reported that some were holding signs like "Doctors Against ICE." VA nurse Alex Preddy's killing definitely hitting home for medical workers. There was a vigil at the VA last week in Seattle. What did you see over the weekend? What stood out to you?
It's interesting. As I was in this haze and this scramble to move this weekend, this protest did break through into my consciousness, which is interesting. Like in one of the busiest weekends of the past year, I noticed people around the community holding signs, making their way to or from the protests. And that stuck with me because the first year of the Trump administration has, I think, engendered kind of a muted reaction by the resistance. It feels like people who are against Trump have been a little bit lost in the woods for the past year.
Even with no kings? Those were really big protests.
Yeah, they were. But as a whole, as someone who's covered the beginning of the first Trump administration 9 years ago and was at rallies constantly and covered that first Women's March that year, it felt a little muted for the past year. But what has happened in Minnesota, and especially the most recent killing, seems to have woken people up here in Seattle and brought them out to the streets in a way that feels more like that early first Trump administration energy.
I mean, I think Minneapolis, and certainly Alex Preddy, has been that watershed moment that has radicalized more people to actually get out there when maybe they were, thinking, I'll vote in the midterms, but, the protest didn't work last time, so why are we even doing it? But Minnesota kind of showed what it looks like for largely peaceful resistance to have a really big political impact. Just want to make a note of the bike riders on Alki who did a memorial ride because Alex Preddy is a big bike rider. And the businesses, Seattle Times reports dozens of businesses closed on Friday. There was a fundraiser organized by Spice Walla that is based in Capitol Hill, Ballard, and Columbia City that was sending money to Minneapolis businesses that were closed, in solidarity with what is happening there. So a number of local folks getting in on those protests. turning the page once more.
You know, we had something special, me and my son, and we were long from done. I was learning from him and growing because of him. As a parent, I was learning from being a parent. And losing him, to lose that, I lost a big part of myself.
That is the voice of Antonio Mays Sr., the father of teenager Antonio Mays Jr., who was killed at Seattle's Capitol Hill Organized Protest, or CHOP, in 2020. A jury on Thursday awarded Mays Sr. more than $30 million in damages, finding the city of Seattle negligent in its response to the shooting, which the jury said led to the teenager's death. Antonio Mays Jr. was 16 when he was killed. Will, there have still been no arrests or charges in this case. Another teenager who was 14 was badly injured that day. You've been covering this. Speaking of a documentary, you're making a documentary in partnership with the Seattle Times about CHOP and about Antonio Mays Jr. Can you just take me to Thursday in the courtroom, what it was like when that verdict was read? Paint a scene for me.
I mean, the suspense could not have been higher. I had been waiting around in that courthouse for 3 weeks for this verdict. The jury was in their little jury room deliberating this for almost 3 weeks, which is unusual for a civil trial. And when we got word that a verdict came down, the attorneys gathered in the courtroom, kind of filled back up with people for the first time. And first, it was announced that the verdict was in favor of Antonio Mays Sr., the father, and he and his lawyer embraced each other. And then when the amount came down, there was they parceled out the award in different amounts, and the final amount was $25 million. That was the last bucket of money. And when that was announced, the father sort of doubled over and with emotion, because an amount of money like that's a very big award.
Yeah.
One of the biggest in King County. And I think it represented for him an acknowledgement by this place that the loss of your son, Antonio Mays Jr., mattered, that we are acknowledging it, that we are acknowledging that we, the city, this community, had a role in that, and that it was significant. So, yeah.
Can you just kind of summarize for us, what do we know about what happened that night? And then how did this case play out?
Sure. So Antonio Mays Jr. was 16 years old. He died at CHOP. If you lived here in 2020, you remember this, it was about 8 square blocks of Capitol Hill were occupied by a protest encampment. Antonio's death happened toward the end of CHOP, where it had kind of degraded and devolved into this chaotic scene where gun violence was becoming more common. Antonio and a friend, a 14-year-old named Robert West, were driving around CHOP in a stolen Jeep. And CHOP had armed security volunteers who interpreted this Jeep as a threat and opened fire, killing Antonio.
And so then how was the city found negligent in his death?
This is interesting. I think the father and his attorney envisioned this lawsuit to be a big reckoning over Seattle's role in CHOP. They imagined the mayor, being on the stand.
Jenny
Durkin, the former mayor. Carmen Best, the former police chief, taking the stand.
Because the Seattle police at that point had abandoned the East Precinct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And allowed the CHOP to stay. Yeah.
So the father and his attorney envisioned this case being an effort to hold the old city regime accountable for creating CHOP and allowing it to persist. The judge threw all of that stuff out before the trial. So none of that made it to trial. In the end, the question that made it to trial was the city's emergency response negligent on the night of the shooting? Pretty narrow question in the end. And the jury decided that essentially the city had a plan for how to handle emergencies in CHOP. On that night, according to the jury, they failed to follow that plan. And that reduced Antonio's chances of survival.
So at this point, as you say, this bigger reckoning over the responsibility for CHOP and, hauling the former mayor in front of a jury, things like that, that doesn't seem to be something that will happen. I mean, what does this case, this verdict really mean, big picture? I mean, it obviously is incredibly painful and at the same time a bit of an acknowledgement, as we heard Antonio Mays Sr. say, that, takes away this idea that there was some kind of responsibility for Antonio Mays Jr. because he was committing a crime, and so therefore the city couldn't be held liable or whatever. Well, that's been now it seems like rejected by a jury. So there is some vindication for the father. But big picture, what do you think this case means?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. For the father, he has watched the city of Seattle sort of turn away from the death of his son for 5 years. This story, the death of Antonio Mays Jr., is very unflattering for the protesters who populated CHOP. It's unflattering for the police who abandoned their precinct. It's unflattering for the city government. Nobody benefits from looking closely at this case. And the father, his stated reason for filing this lawsuit is that he sensed this mass turning away of Seattle away from this shooting. And he wanted to force the city to look at it. And I feel like he got that from this, right? Wow. The city is forced to reckon with what happened to this son. Also, in that turning away, Antonio Mays Jr. has been painted as a criminal for 5 years. Some protesters said, without evidence, that he was shooting from that Jeep that night.
To try to justify why their security would kill him.
Exactly. Now, the trial...
He's a 16-year-old. Just, let's highlight that. Yeah.
The trial, including a video analyst who testified for the city, found no evidence that anyone was shooting from the white Jeep. So there's no video evidence of that happening. And the question of whether Antonio played a role in stealing the Jeep there was a lot of mixed evidence at the trial. It was unclear. And the jury seemed unconvinced by that argument. In the end, the judge threw out that whole line of questioning, so that didn't even factor into the final judgment. But the jury seemed unconvinced in interviews afterward. So for the father, this was also an exoneration of his son.
I'm talking with Will James, who's a audio documentary producer and reporter at KUOW, who was in the courtroom when this verdict was read, awarding more than $30 million in damages to Antonio Mays Sr. over the city's negligence in the death of his son at CHOP. We're going to turn the page here, Will, but of course there's going to be a lot more reporting from you and Sydney Brownstone and your team in the coming time when you're releasing this new podcast that you've been working on about CHOP. So I know that there's a lot more to look forward to here. But for now, we are going to turn the page and we're going to lighten it up just a little bit for our final story and front page. Where's the lyrics? There he is. All right, that's Zach Top, who is a Yakima and Sunnyside, Yakima County and Pasco based country singer. He won the very first what's called the Best Traditional Country Album at yesterday's Grammys. They've just now, for the Grammys, split off contemporary country and traditional country. Zach Top, Pride of Sunnyside. The album is called Ain't In It For My Health. Will, do you listen to country? Do you like Zach Top?
I've never heard of Zach Top until today, but I'm excited,
This your vibe? This feels like it could be your vibe.
So
yeah.
So having grown up in New York and moved to Seattle, yeah.
Yeah, you think so?
I have a learning curve before I get fully here, but I'm somewhere on that curve.
All right. I love it. I love a little bit of steel guitar, and he's heavy on the steel guitar. Whenever there's like a little bit of twang involved, I'm into it. I'm a not much of a country listener. I'm a Casey Musgraves fan.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I like
That is
Tim
my one
McGraw back in the
country-
90s.
Casey is my country touchstone.
Yeah, well, of course, because she's, you know, the hipster, like, non-country person.
Fair.
You know, she sings about anime and, like, marijuana.
This feels like an indictment of me.
No.
That's fair.
It's great. I love that Zach Top has that history touring bluegrass festivals around Washington State, and you know, kind of in the vein of the Loretta Lynn, the coal miner's daughter, who got her start in Washington State. Congrats to Zach Top, and hey, you know, just as we're welcoming and thanking Will James for being on Front Page, you know, this is the first for Soundside to play a little country music, so it's great. Thanks so much,
Will. It's an honor
Will.
to be here for this.
Yeah, this is a milestone, and thank you for listening to Front Page. If you want to leave a comment or leave us a voicemail, 206-221-3213 or soundside at KUOW.org. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org or on your favorite podcast app.